Hi, it's Daisy from mywidowedheart.com. Today I want to talk a bit about grief triggers. First off though, let me say that I'm not an expert on grief. I'm just sharing my experiences as a widow. So, what are grief triggers? A grief trigger is something that brings up memories and flashbacks related to your loss, causing your grief and all the emotions connected with it to intensify or return with a vengeance. And I say all the emotions because when you're grieving, you don't just experience sadness, but lots of other emotions too, like anger, resentment, guilt, hopelessness, and so on. These triggers seem to be lurking everywhere, especially during the first few years after loss, and they often show up suddenly and without warning. You can be fine 1 minute, only to have a grief trigger completely derail you the next and throw you back into the darkest grief. A grief trigger could be something as simple as going to the grocery store and seeing a certain food item that your lost loved one really liked. That particular one tormented me a lot of times. Grocery shopping was really hard for me after my loss. I used to avoid a lot of aisles because they were filled with triggers. There were so many items where I thought, oh, I used to buy that for him, or oh, he really liked that. I was often afraid I would break down and start crying in the middle of the grocery store. Another trigger might be seeing a happy couple walk hand in hand, reminding you of what you've lost, or having to do a task that your loved one used to take care of, or maybe finding an old receipt from a restaurant you went to together, maybe hearing your loved one's favorite song on the radio. Triggers can be tiny things no one would ever suspect to have the power to send you into a tailspin and back full force into the worst grief. A lot of times these triggers come out of nowhere. Other times they're a little more predictable, like holidays and anniversaries. Some other triggers for me were driving by the hospital or the doctor's offices he had to go to so many times. Oh boy, that was tough. I even had to pull over once or twice because I was so overwhelmed with grief and tears, I couldn't safely keep driving. With time, I learned to expect certain triggers and was somewhat prepared for them, although it's not like they don't affect you, even if you know they're coming. Some of them you might be able to avoid, like taking a different route if driving by the hospital is too hard on you. Holidays and anniversaries are big trigger events for most grievers and usually a bit more predictable. You can probably anticipate at least some triggers and perhaps be somewhat prepared for them. What I mean by prepared is mostly just knowing and being aware that they're going to happen. You cannot stop your grief. You're still going to react to those triggers and have setbacks. But just knowing that on certain days you'll probably have a really hard time can be helpful. You can make plans on how to make it through that particular day or a particular event. Have options and ideas on what to do when you start feeling too overwhelmed. You might want to be prepared to leave an event early if it's too much to handle, so think about how you would make your exit. Also, would you need other arrangements for transportation? Or if you stay, would there be a private space to escape to if a tsunami of tears is unleashed? Even if there's nothing you can do to prevent a trigger and your reaction to it, just having a few options in the back of your mind can help. For me, one really bad trigger during the holiday season was having to write Christmas cards. My husband and I used to do it together every year. I actually never enjoyed it, but like I said, it was something we did together. He would write the message inside and I would address the envelopes. So after he passed away, having to write Christmas cards was a major trigger that really threw me in a downward spiral, back to the worst sadness and despair. So over the years, I sent less and less cards until I finally decided to stop completely. Maybe people thought I was rude and uncaring, but you know what? Sometimes you just gotta do what's right for you. And I'm not saying that you should avoid your grief. But if you can eliminate at least some of these triggers, go ahead and do it, even if it means changing traditions, routines, or other things. And if you're worried that other people will be bothered by these changes, Explain to them why it's necessary for you. Anyway, with so many triggers out there to blindside you and knock you down, why not do something about the ones you know are coming? If you're employed, what if a trigger sets off a crying spell at work? What could you do? Where could you go? Or who could take over the phone or whatever for 10 minutes or so if you suddenly can't handle it anymore? Is there a restroom or some other place where you could hide out for a while if you need privacy? Is there a coworker you could go to for comfort? It's good to have some kind of a plan in place just in case it all gets to be too much. Hopefully you have an understanding boss and coworkers who will support you and listen to your needs and preferences. If there's a task that you know will trigger your grief badly, maybe it could be assigned to someone else for a while. Communicate with them early on about how your grief might affect you in the workplace and, if possible, discuss some options. What if there's a particular day, like the death anniversary or your loved one's birthday, for example, that will surely be a huge trigger? Maybe you can take the day off if that's helpful to you. You might not be very productive anyway. On difficult days like these, an outing with a friend or some other planned activity could be a good distraction to get you through the day. So unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do. Triggers and setbacks are going to happen. They're part of the grief journey. But in some cases at least, you might be able to anticipate them and maybe even prepare for them in some way. Sometimes it's going to feel like you're not making progress at all because these nasty triggers keep knocking you down and seem to erase any steps forward toward healing. I know it's frustrating, but please don't get discouraged when it feels like you're constantly back to square one. Grief is a long, hard journey, but little by little, life can get better again. Even after all these years, grief triggers still affect me too sometimes. But I can tell you they're much more rare these days, and the impact is a lot less intense. In my early grief, a trigger would often knock me down for an entire day or more. Now, if it happens, I recover much faster, and it's not quite as painful as it used to be. It does get better, my friends. Hang in there. Let us know in the comment section what some of your triggers are, and share your ideas and thoughts on the topic. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And don't forget to check out my website at mywidowedheart.com, where I share my personal grief journey as well as helpful tips and information for dealing with grief and loss.